And one of the things we human beings do is we often use complicated ways of thinking so that we don't see things that are very important. So, if we take something as simple as meditation, there's lots of reasons to meditate. And there's lots of different ways to meditate, a lot of different techniques. And we assume sometimes that all those techniques are going in the same direction, when they're actually not. Most of the techniques have a very specific aim, a very specific intention. And like I always ask people, one of the first questions I think that's relevant in spirituality is, why are you here? What are you doing? What's your spirituality about for you, in other words? Exactly and precisely, why would you do something like this? You see? And what I found out when I started to teach some 17 years ago is I had this assumption, a naive assumption it turned out, that I thought everybody knew why they were doing whatever they were doing. I mean, because at that time, when I started to teach, I was very young for a spiritual teacher. I was like 33 years old at the time. Now I'm 50. And I was really quite surprised when I would talk to people. Some people had been meditating for a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, and when I would ask them, so exactly why are you doing this? I was surprised how few could actually tell me why they were doing it. Or some would just say something off the top of their head. Usually it was something that somebody else told them. Do you know? If you meditate, you'll get this. And so, well, okay, I'll do that. But the reason why we do something is extraordinarily important because it sets one's trajectory. And like I said, even something broad like spirituality in general, you can be into spirituality for lots of reasons. Maybe you want to relieve a little stress. You want to get not as caught up in your mind. You want to feel a little bit better. You want to know God. You want to feel a little bit more free. You're interested in what enlightenment is all about. You want to know the fundamental nature of reality, or God, or Buddha nature. All these are very, very different reasons to be involved in spirituality. And it's useful to know what's your reason. The reason is because if you know what your reason is, then you can stop wasting so much time. Does that make sense? In other words, you do things that actually speak to that reason, and you stop doing things that don't speak to that reason. And so it just gives this isn't anything mystical, is it? This is things you do when you go for a job interview. People do this all the time, but it's amazing how we can spend, like I said, years at a spiritual practice without actually asking ourselves that question in a really deep and fundamental way. Often when people do, the first thing they realize is they're not quite sure. Why am I doing this? Exactly. Precisely. What's it about? Not that did someone promise me, did someone tell me I would get out of this, but what is it the sort of, what is the reason? Now, that comes in, it's directly relevant to the type of meditation we were just experimenting with. Because my interest in spirituality from the very beginning, I was through dumb luck, I suppose. I kind of knew I knew the direction. I didn't know how to get there, and I certainly didn't know what the destination was going to look like. But I had a certain idea why I was into it. I read a book when I was probably 19 or 20 years old. When you're innocently reading something, and you got to watch out when you're innocently doing things, because sometimes something can reach out and grab you and change the whole trajectory of your life. And that's kind of what happened to me as a very young man. And I read this book, and somewhere in it was the word enlightenment. I didn't know what enlightenment was. I didn't know it from a hole in the ground. But somehow, when I read the word, it was like a bomb went off inside of me. And at the instant that I read the word, I knew that the entire trajectory of my life was changed. The way it was going was derailed. It was on a new trajectory. I didn't know where it was going. I didn't even know what this enlightenment thing was about. But immediately, I knew. It was like a nuclear explosion. And all from that point on, I had to find out what that was, what that word indicated. And so from that point on, of course, the whole trajectory that I had was I needed to find out what the fundamental nature of reality was. Or you could take it in a less abstract sounding sense and just think of it as the natural state. What's the natural state? The completely natural, spontaneous state to be. And so this meditation that I just talked very quickly about is relevant in the sense of we're often trying to get to some natural state of well-being, of freedom, whatever we might call it. And often we're trying to get there through extraordinarily unnatural means. Does that make sense? Some of the most violent places you'll ever walk into are meditation halls. They look peaceful. They may even feel peaceful. The silence will often be nice. But if you're really sensitive, sometimes you can feel that sometimes they have a lot of the people in them, not all the people, but a lot of the people in them are at some sort of war within themselves. I know this because I was at war with myself on the meditation cushion for some years. And, when you're forcibly trying to keep your mind in a particular place, you're trying to concentrate, you're trying to make this happen, you're trying to be more at peace, you're trying to do something. And of course, the more ardently you're trying to make something happen, the more conflict you feel inside. And so you look good, but we often set up an unnecessary division within ourselves, psychologically and emotionally. Because we're often using the various forms of control. And I use the word control for a reason. Number one, I think it's a very accurate word to use in the way that most of us meditate. We're trying to perfect some sort of control. And the idea is if I could perfect this form of control, better known as a meditation technique, if I can perfect this, then I'll come to a place of well-being, non-division, and if you're interested, maybe you hope you come to some more liberated state or enlightened place. And so I don't know how we ever got this idea that I would arrive at this totally natural state of freedom through completely unnatural means, but nonetheless, it's sort of, it's one of those infections that gets into, in this case, spirituality. And before you know it, we're trying and trying and trying and trying and trying. You may even get good at it. You can get good at perfecting your experience. Well, some of you can. Some of you'll never be good at it. Don't worry, there's hope for you. And there may be more hope for you than the people that are good at it. One can get their mind concentrated in a very narrow way on a very specific thing. It could be, you could pick anything actually, but you might get very, very good at it. And if your mind gets very narrowly controlled, then you feel there's a certain amount of peace with that. Right? There's a certain amount of well-being that goes with that. But the difficulty that most people find, that even the people that get good at that, which again, what they've gotten good at is controlling their experience. The people who get good at controlling their experience, The next question they will have is, how do I take this nice state that I can get in when I'm meditating, and how do I take it into my everyday life? And the answer is simple, and everybody knows it. You don't. As long as it's based in control, you got to be controlling. And it's hard to do two types of controlling at the same time. You can do one type when you're on the cushion, but if you have to go to work or have a discussion or feed the kids or tell the dog not to do that on the carpet or whatever it is, then you have to stop doing the control, one type of control, to start to do. Is this familiar to people? Right? And so then you go, okay, now when I'm meditating, it feels really, really good. And then when I go into my life, it feels it's not quite as clear. Right? That tells us something about the way we're meditating. And I'm not even saying that one shouldn't do it. I'm saying, remember, it all comes down to, what do you want? If that's what you want, God bless you. Go ahead and do it. Because that's all of spirituality. It's what do you want? It's not whether something's right and something's wrong. I'm not saying that concentration is wrong. I'm not saying that this is right. That's not part of my. It's not part of my interest in any way whatsoever. But in terms of meditation, the day that I discovered, and of course, again, it was sort of dumb luck. If it wasn't for dumb luck, I'd be nowhere. Which is sort of where it got me anyway, so. But one day, I just literally sat down, and a thought occurred to me, and I sat down, but I hadn't started to meditate, because if I had started to meditate, then I would be trying not to have the thought. Does that make sense? So this thought came before I could get rid of this thought. And this thought actually ended up to be a really useful thought, as some thoughts can be. And what this thought was, it was sort of a question. And I'd never asked this question. I never heard this question. I gave it to you when we were meditating. And I just thought, since I'm trying so hard to have my mind, to quiet my mind and to have my awareness in the right place and do the right thing and the whole meditation technique thing, I thought, number one, it doesn't seem to be working very well. That's why I said there's hope for you, those who don't get good at this. And I wasn't very good at it, And I had this question. It was a very innocent question, like a child would ask. And the question that came to me was, I wonder if the stillness and the peace and the awareness that I'm chasing through my meditation, if it's not already here. Now, I don't know where that question came from. It was a gift. It just was gifted to me. But this question sort of visited me one day, and I can't tell you what a shock it was when the question landed. And I thought, because it immediately, like snapping your fingers, I immediately saw that the question got me out of the sense of trying to control my experience. Now, I didn't even know I was necessarily trying to control. And all of a sudden, what I realized is everything I'm searching for, it's already there in my experience before I try to search for it. And I realized up until that point, my whole meditation, without knowing it at all, being totally unconscious of this, but my whole meditation up till that point, some years, had actually been an unconscious denial of the very thing I was seeking. Does it make sense? So my assumption was, because there was so much, and there is so much talk of awareness in Buddhism, and my assumption was that I have to try to be more aware. And that what was behind that assumption was that there somehow was lacking a critical amount of awareness right now. That was the assumption, right? That's why I think we should always feel free to ask the questions that everybody's afraid of asking, Like if somebody says, okay, now we're going to try to be more aware now. And almost nobody kind of raises their hand and goes, so is that saying that we're not aware now? maybe the answer is yes, maybe it's no, but see, there's certain questions that we don't often ask. And so I was very surprised when I found not only was there a pre-existing stillness, a pre-existing peace, but there was also a pre-existing awareness. All of which I had to deny was present so that I could get about the business of trying to find those things. Is this familiar to anybody? And imagine my surprise when I saw that. I mean, to recount it may not sound very fantastic, but it hit me like a thunderbolt. I was just dumbstruck, like, I cannot believe this. All this stuff I've been looking for, and it's there before I do anything. Wow. And of course, I could see the mind's old tendency to try to regain control. Yes, but. Yes, but. Yes, but. Yes, but. And each of the yes, buts seemed to be reasonable until I looked at them, and I could see that every yes, but was a way of denying what was present. Yes, but da-da-da-da. Yes, this is true, but da-da-da. And I looked at every one of those, and I thought, I'll be darned. My mind is arguing against freedom in the guise of looking for it. Do you know? That was also the day I gained an amazing respect, actually almost verging on awe of the power of illusion. You know, we usually think of illusion as just some sort of sinister, terrible thing. But, you know, when you really see how illusion works, you have to be at the very least impressed by it. The way it can, you know, it worms its way in and uses the best things within us and turns them into difficulty. It wasn't too much after that day that I had another one of these gifts. And the other gift was that I'd been chasing enlightenment for some years, not knowing what I was chasing really, do you know? And all of a sudden I had another question just sort of dropped into consciousness. When I say dropped in, I say that simply because that's what it felt like. It wasn't, I didn't think it into existence. It was just gifted. It was all of a sudden there. And what I realized, what came to me was, on what basis is my entire spiritual life, on what basis does it sit upon? And I saw that it sits upon the basis of me. In other words, I'm the one doing it. I'm the one seeking the enlightenment. I'm the one trying to meditate. I'm the one trying to... And I thought, my God, I'm the one that's in the center of everything. Does that make sense? Everything. Me. Even if you don't want your me to be in the center of everything, it shockingly is in the middle of everything, right? Even people that are trying to be selfless are actually self-full. Remember that illusion thing that's tricky? Right? A self trying not to be a self is about as much self as you can possibly be. It looks better and it behaves nicer, usually. But all of a sudden, another one of these sort of little nuclear explosions went off inside, and I realized, and I thought, how could I know if my basis for my search for enlightenment has any validity whatsoever if I don't even know myself? I don't even know who it is that's chasing enlightenment. I don't know what this thing called me is. I don't actually have any idea whatsoever. And if this thing called me is on this spiritual search, and I don't even know what this thing called me is, how do I know that my search has any validity? How do I know that anything in my life has any validity whatsoever? Because it's all based on a me that I have no idea what it is. Does anybody have this kind of thing ever come upon you? I don't mean from a book or because someone tells you that it dawned. Maybe you read it or hear it, but when it really hits you, it's sort of like, yeah, on what basis am I living my life? Because whether I liked it or not, everything was about me. And all of a sudden I realized I didn't know what that was. Well, for someone who was chasing enlightenment, this was another kind of a shock. It was one of those moments that reorients your entire approach. And I suddenly realized, whatever enlightenment is, I got to find out who's seeking it first. I mean, it only makes sense, right? Otherwise, on what basis is your search taking place? If you don't even know who's on the search. And so therein began as I know it's stupid as it sounds, the search for myself. Which I knew was kind of silly at the beginning, because what could be more ludicrous than looking for yourself? I mean, in one sense, it makes sense until you look at it. As if, like, you could disappear and have to find yourself, or lose yourself, like keys or a pair of sunglasses, and come upon yourself. So it struck me as sort of really paradoxical that here I am, whatever I am, looking for what I am. Now that's really a strange thing to be involved in, Which is kind of what spirituality will do for you if you take it half seriously. It will take you into sort of strange places and lead you to ask really strange and often uncomfortable questions. So I won't keep going with the whole sordid detail of my story, because it's just another sordid detail of a story.